Good evening. Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, May 1st at 5 p.m. Can we have roll call, please?
Planning Commissioners Astorian, Landrigan,
Present.
Lee, Sheets,
Here.
and Chairperson Yesai.
Here. Report regarding posting of agenda, please.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on Wednesday, April 24th, 2013, on the bulletin board outside City Hall and on the city's website.
Great. Pledge of Allegiance. Will everyone please stand and repeat after me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, approval of the minutes. Does anyone have any comments? Can I get a motion?
I move approval.
We have a second? Or do we need a second?
I wasn't here.
You weren't here. Can I second? All right, passing the gavel to...
Mr. Sheets.
I have to do it?
Does it matter?
Just ignore it.
Well, I'm seconding, whoever it goes to.
All right.
Pass the
You wanna
gavel
hit
back.
All right, good.
So
Roll
formal.
call, please.
Aye.
Sheets,
Abstain?
and Yesai.
Aye. All right, oral communication. I don't have any cards. Let's move on. Zoning appeals, agenda item number 6, no new business. Old business, we have one parking reduction permit case number PPRP 1227790, and this is for the property on 1113 South Central Avenue.
Chairperson Yusayan, the applicant's appellant's representative requested that this case be continued to the next Planning Commission hearing. That would be May 15th.
Okay. Is there a reason for them asking?
According to my understanding is that they would prefer to have a full quorum. Excuse me, all members present, rather.
Oh, okay. All right, sounds good. Do we have a motion?
I move that we continue case number PPRP 1227790 to May 15th.
I second it.
All right, roll call, please.
Planning
Without further notice.
Without further notice.
Planning Commissioners Landrigan,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
Chairperson Yesai.
Aye. All right, next item, parking reduction permit number PPRP 1211310 for property 515 South Glendale Avenue.
Chairperson Yusayan?
Yes.
The appellant's representative for this case as well has requested that the commission continue their case to the next hearing, which would be May 15th.
Same reason?
No, their reason is that they need more time for the traffic engineer to finalize the report that was requested by the commission at the last hearing.
So the report we have now, is that going to be updated? Or is that not the final report? Or do we not have?
Well, we haven't received anything yet finalized from the appellant's representative. Again, it has nothing to do with the staff report. It's
Okay.
more the traffic or parking study and count inventory that was requested by the commission the last time. They're looking into putting additional information based on the future proposed use as it relates to traffic information and parking.
So what they submitted, what we got in our packets, their submission.
That was for Central.
I think you got them confused. The 1113 South Central had a parking
you're
analysis
right.
that
You're
was
right.
submitted.
Yeah, this is for the bakery. Okay,
Right.
Sounds good.
You haven't received anything for the bakery yet.
Right, okay. Do we have a motion?
I have a question regarding that case. I was not here on the original session, the hearing, but I did review the material, and I was confused as to the outcome. At one point, I thought that it would be just a decision. Based on the deliberation that went on, it looked like there was going to be further analysis of traffic control, which would be brought back to the commission. So my question is that a new hearing? Or is that something, how will that work? Will we just go back and only talk about one thing? What would be the process at that point in time?
Well, Chairman of the Commission, members of the Planning Commission, you have some options. You can reopen the hearing to take additional testimony on the entire matter. You can reopen the hearing for purposes of just taking new testimony as it pertains to information, the additional information that you've requested.
Okay. All right. So that it can be that way, which seemed to be what was the desire at that when I reviewed the case.
Yes.
All right. Very good.
But the commission's deliberations are unlimited.
Okay. All right. So is there this move?
You want to move?
Yeah, I move that we move the parking reduction permit PPRP 1211310 for 515 South Glendale. The next commission meeting on May 15th.
Without further notice?
Without further notice.
Got it.
Second.
Can we have roll call, please?
Planning Commissioners Landrigan,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
Chairperson Yasayan.
Aye. Thanks. Okay, can we have the record show that Commissioner Chang Lee has joined us? And Mr. Lee, just so you're caught up, we continued the two cases that were before us. And yeah, so you didn't miss much. And we're going into agenda item number 7 right now. Okay, so we continued the last two cases.
Just two.
This and the case before that. So item number 7, Planning Commission items. Nothing for old business, new business, Glendale Municipal Code Amendment. This affects citywide, and the applicant is the City of Glendale. We have a staff report.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Planning Commissioners. This is an amendment or miscellaneous amendments and revisions, including cleanups, to Title 16 subdivisions and Title 30 of zoning of the municipal code. And the other titles are included because there are related modifications to those titles. I have a little PowerPoint presentation on the highlights. There is more detail in the staff report, and the main document is the draft ordinance that we distributed. If I may go through the slides, I can point out the highlights.
Right.
Can I ask staff one question first?
Sure.
These are all staff recommended, or were these recommended by other applicants? Were there any public hearings, or are these just considered cleanup?
The source varies as we work with the zoning code or Title 16. We notice there are errors or inconsistencies, so we bring them to these. We lump them in these amendments. The other source is the Planning Commission, as we can see in a moment. There was a question on guest parking spaces in multifamily buildings, whether they need to be reserved for the exclusive use of disabled persons. So that's another item. The other source is comments that we receive from the public, council, and other sources like that, and then we lump them. If they're not significant amendments, we bring them to your attention. Council initiated these, and now the Planning Commission looks at them, and then eventually, depending on the direction, we'll take them to council.
Thank
So
you.
the sources vary.
Thanks for that information.
You're welcome. Okay, in a nutshell, the amendments tonight include policy changes, codifying zoning interpretations that we've accumulated over time, codifying existing practice, and we'll see examples of this in a moment, correction of inconsistencies, correction of errors which have happened throughout the recent amendments, and correction of personnel titles. And let me go through these. So let's start out with the miscellaneous changes that are more mundane, and then we can go into more of the policy discussions. The miscellaneous changes to personnel titles. And this, if you remember the recent changes, the position of the zoning administrator has been eliminated and replaced by a hearing officer or the director of community development. So this is related to those changes, not just in Title 30 or Title 16, but in the other titles that are included in this. The Planning Commission, we brought them to the Planning Commission for information purposes, but the Planning Commission's authority and recommendation will be for Title 16 and 30, basically. So it's for context that we've included the other titles. Changes to names of departments, and this is regarding the recent change. The Community Planning Department now is called Community Development Department, and this change is occurring throughout the amendments. Changes to noticing requirements for consistency. Recently, the notification radius was changed from 300 to 500 feet. We've noticed places in the municipal code where this wasn't changed, and this amendment is going to address that. Mailing of public hearing notices to occupants. This was added recently to notify occupants in addition to property owners within the radius. So we've noticed a few places in the municipal code where this was not addressed, and this amendment is going to address it. And site posting. Site posting became required a few years ago. For a public hearing, the site has to be posted. Appeals to the Planning Commission. This was not included in appeals to the Planning Commission, and we are including it now. So this is basically to make noticing consistent throughout, based on the recent amendments. Now, policy changes and clarifications. We can start out with billiards. Recently, the code was amended in the DSP zone to allow billiard establishments as a permitted use rather than by conditional use permit. And this was based on an observation that billiard establishments were not a problem in the zone. Now, this is going to extend that same permitting process in the commercial districts where billiards are permitted currently by CUP. The next item is rooftop equipment in single-family zones. We've been allowing replacement of permitted rooftop equipment in single-family zones in the same location. And this is a clarification of the practice. Guest parking spaces in multifamily buildings, and this item was brought up by the Planning Commission based on a recent case. We've included text in this that guest parking spaces, in the draft ordinance, it refers to compliance with the building code, which incorporates ADA requirements. My understanding, talking to the building division, is that if one guest parking space is required, that guest parking space must be designed with the sizes, dimensions of an ADA accessible space, but it does not have to be signed and reserved for the exclusive use of a disabled person. In more guest parking spaces, the ADA requirements address those. The way we've worded the draft ordinance is to refer to give notice to applicants to take building code requirements and ADA requirements into account. And as building code or ADA requirements vary, those would vary. We wouldn't have to amend the zoning code if ADA requirements are updated. So in the zoning code, we've inserted just a reference to the building code, which incorporates ADA requirements.
So the dimensions will comply with the ADA requirements. But do you need to have a sign up there too? Because it's a bit confusing.
Right. If it's only one guest parking space that's required, that one guest parking space
But no handicap signs.
must not have handicap signs
Okay.
or ADA signs, or reserved for the exclusive use for ADA. And this is in the parking code. We've inserted language. There are references to the page numbers in the draft ordinance as to where those items are located. Okay, other policy changes. Time extension requests. And this applies to planning entitlements like variances and conditional use permits and other such entitlements. Currently, there's a 2-year time limitation after which an applicant has to apply to the body that granted that entitlement to request a 1-year exception. In order to streamline the process, the proposal is to grant that authority to the Director of Community Development, subject to making written findings. But it precludes the formal review of the authority that granted that entitlement in the first place. The next one is reinstatement of design review entitlement. And again, here the authority will be granted to the Director of Community Development. Design review entitlements. Once a design review entitlement is granted and subsequent to that a building permit is issued, the design review entitlement runs the same course as the building permit. So when the building permit expires, the design review entitlement expires with it if it's after the initial 2 years. In certain instances, applicants have requested that a building permit be reactivated. In situations like that, the Director of Community Development would be authorized to reinstate that design review entitlement in association with the building permit, subject to making written findings, one of which is a determination that the neighborhood conditions are the same or haven't changed substantially. Next. Administrative exceptions. The administrative exceptions allow for an application to place rooftop equipment in single-family zones if there are flat roof portions, subject to making findings. Flat roof is not defined in the zoning code. This is to add clarification as to what flat roof means. And talking to the building division, the proposal is to limit it to a slope of 1 in 12. If the slope is a maximum of 1 in 12, that can be called a flat roof. We did this because pretty much every roof has to have a certain slope for drainage.
Exactly.
What makes it flat? This defines it now. The next one is a 10% deviation from number of parking spaces. This is in relation to a recent modification to the code that allowed, by administrative exception, a 10% deviation from any numerical standard in the zoning code, with the exception of number of parking spaces and floor area ratio.
So when you have a decimal points as a 10%, does that become whole as a next number?
Typically, when it's for parking spaces,
So it's 10.1 becomes 11.
by code, 0.5 or more gets rounded up, fractional remainders, under 0.5 gets rounded down.
Oh, I see. So you go there. Okay.
But others, I believe we put language that they get rounded down. But parking, there's already some language in the parking code, the number of parking spaces. So now, this proposal extends the 10% deviation to the number of parking spaces. FAR, floor area ratio deviations will still be precluded from this provision. And this is, again, subject to making findings.
Can you give an example? What does this apply to?
I give you examples. Numerical standards, for instance, relate to setbacks, building setbacks, building height, percentage of landscaping, let's say. Let me see if I can think. The 50%, which we're going to see in a moment, 50% voluntary demolition of a non-conforming building.
So if any of those come into play, the planning department has a 10% wiggle room to
The applicant,
for the parking that they allow.
in this particular proposal, yes. So if, let's say, the requirement is for 10 parking spaces, 10% of that will be one parking space, an applicant may request a deviation of one parking space. Or
And
as
then and then the staff can allow that without it coming to the planning commission. Is that what?
without a variance. It's not a variance. It's an administrative accession process which covers different types of. It applies to different types of requests.
Okay.
One of which, for instance, is architectural encroachment of architectural elements into required setbacks, deviation from.
So this is being put in place so they don't need to get a variance.
Yes,
Right.
It's a minor deviation.
That's what I wanted
Just
to.
to
Without,
conclude here.
and the findings are different from the
Right.
variance findings.
And if I may, our hope is that by providing a way for people, an easier way for people to ask for small exceptions, it might get them to diminish the scope of what they're asking for. If it's just as difficult to ask for a small exception as a large one, you might as well go for the large one. So if there's an easier route for small exceptions, it might steer some people into, more modest deviations from the code.
Has this been added since the city council initiated that process of trying to streamline some of these variances that are
No.
coming before us?
No, actually, this was put in place probably 2 years ago through another large miscellaneous and other policy amendments.
So this exception is not new?
Not the 10%. The 10% deviation by administrative exception was put in place about 2 years ago, approximately, through a large miscellaneous
Okay.
amendments and other policy amendments. At that time, deviation requests for floor area ratio and number of parking spaces were excluded from this request.
Oh, so what was the 10% deviation put for?
Any other numerical standard in the zoning code.
Okay, so parking wasn't included. That's what we're adding now.
Parking was included in the sense that deviation requests could be made for parking dimensions, for instance.
But not spaces.
number of spaces.
Spaces.
Right.
That's what's new.
That's what's new
Got
in
it.
here.
All right.
May I ask a question? So when we take something that used to be a variance and we now make it an administrative exception, what is the past determination considered? It stays the same? If it was a variance and now it is an AE? I know that certain grandfathered clauses come in, but how are some of the previous determinations now handled that we are making these changes?
Well, there are two ways to look at this. One is, for instance, if there is a variance for number of parking spaces, and maybe for some other features like dimensions or parking dimensions and other standards, that variance would probably remain unless the administrative exception, which is discretionary, addresses the effectiveness of the variance. For instance, if there was a variance for number of parking spaces to reduce the number of required parking spaces. Now, this administrative exception may be to further reduce what was already permitted by variance, or maybe it's associated with a change of land use, in which case the administrative exception may supersede the variance. So it's discretionary.
I guess part of my concern is and one of the issues we've seen in some of the determinations are accumulation of variances. There's no limit to how many variances you can have.
Right. And there's no limit here as to how many 10% deviations may be requested from what standards. It may be multiple numeric standards. But there's always discretion. It's subject to making findings. It's like a mini variance without, granted with slightly different findings, but without the public hearing process.
But it's a request and not an automatic.
It's not an automatic. It's an application. That the request is through a formal application. It gets reviewed, and the hearing officer, not at a public hearing, would make a decision. It's subject to an appeal.
Right. So if they deny it, then it's open for appeal.
Or approve it, it's subject to an appeal.
Right.
If the previous variance contained conditions, in theory, someone could apply for an administrative exception and argue that they don't want to apply, adhere to those conditions anymore, but the city would have the right to impose them, again, through the administrative exception if we felt them justified.
So I guess the administrative exception can also have conditions.
Absolutely.
All right. That was not clear to me.
Okay,
that
right.
gives me
Right.
more confidence.
And I just would like to say that our staff has, in the last 5 years especially, have gotten much more in the practice. You'll see this in every staff report you get on a property. They will talk about permit histories and any other concurrent permits that are applied for right now. So we've made it a real practice to, going to your comment about could there be multiple requests going on, I mean, it is our staff's practice to be on top of that.
What I'm hearing in this discussion is the intention is to, in a way, streamline the process or provide options that would benefit both the applicant and the planning department to make a decision quickly as opposed to having to go through the whole process. What I also see based on the discussion and the questions from Commissioner Landrigan is it opens up a whole new arena where people can go, aha, I now can, of course there's costs involved, but sometimes I think that doesn't matter to people that want to come before the board, before the commission. So could they then say, I want to relook at my previous denial or previous conditions, and I want to review it with the 10% factor, and kind of, so the unintended consequence would be that they could now start the process again, and it keeps everybody busy doing a small review of this process. Is that the case? Does it open it up for that opportunity?
In theory, it does. I will say that Chris mentioned earlier that a few years ago, we put in to the administrative exceptions that you could apply for a 10% deviation on any numerical standard except parking. And I don't think that we saw, I can't even think of a single case where someone had a variance and said, oh, now I fall into this and I want to revisit my conditions.
Right. It just seemed the discussion could open it up. Sometimes my sense is when we have these appeals and reappeals and that the people don't, it's more a challenge than it is about the cost and the time. So that's kind of where I was coming from.
Yeah, actually, I would like to ask Kristen to weigh in because Kristen has been assigned to review administrative exceptions for the last number of years.
Since the 10% reduction, I think the only thing off the top of my head I can think of, maybe two, and it was 2 cases, and they dealt with garage dimensions. It was, an inch or two for a garage dimension.
So, having said all that, I see the intent, and I think it's good. It's just that as we talked through it, some other options opened up in my mind, and I was wondering about them. Thank you.
This particular process is already in place, not for parking, but for other standards. And there's no proposal to take that away at this point. Okay, next, non-conforming buildings and structures. This is a clarification of the 50% voluntary demolition provision. There's a provision in the code. Let me flip to it. There's a provision in the code that deals with non-conforming buildings and structures and allows for non-conforming buildings and structures to retain their non-conformities if a certain amount of the exterior is not voluntarily removed. This is clarifying that, and consistent with practice, that if there is a wall, for instance, that's non-conforming with respect to setback, that non-conforming wall may not be replaced in its location and must be made to comply. So it's a clarification of the voluntary demolition rule. The next item, it adds clarification as to how to deal with doors, windows, and curved walls, how those are calculated. And basically, if the entire wall section is removed, then window areas are part of that wall. If it's just the window that's being removed and replaced, it does not count towards the voluntary demolition. And that clarification is added in the draft ordinance. And this is based on a zoning interpretation that we've incorporated now. We're trying to codify. Next item, parking computation for outdoor dining areas. This relates to establishments that primarily serve food, and we've included a list in the draft ordinance to not get them confused with, for instance, like a school that has an outdoor seating area for students to eat. It relates to, it focuses on restaurants, fast food establishments, coffee shops, and similar establishments.
What page is this one on?
93. Am I correct? Good, because I had a question about it.
Okay. The concept here is that if this outdoor seating area, outdoor dining area, is open, unenclosed, and it's close to the public sidewalk, and it contributes to enlivening the the pedestrian experience, then parking will not be charged for such seating area. But if this seating area, for instance, is enclosed, covered, or in the back portion of the property, not contributing to the pedestrian experience on the sidewalk, on public property, then parking will be charged for the seating area. And in the draft ordinance, we've included a detailed explanation as to what constitutes proximity to the public sidewalk, what constitutes being covered or enclosed. So basically, there could be a wall, a low separation.
So you're not going to count it as square footage area for parking if it enlivens the pedestrian environment. That
Based on
is
this
the
definition.
gist?
Yeah. That's the concept.
Okay, so the concept is that if it doesn't become a private, if we look at the Americana, we have Granville Cafe. It's part of the experience because it's still open to pedestrian interaction.
And it's right next to the pedestrian sidewalks.
It is.
Yeah.
However, if we looked at Frida's, I'm just using two examples that I have, which is really enclosed and has heaters and doesn't, would Frida's meet the intent too?
I don't know off the top of my head because that development
Because it
is
has
controlled
glass
by
higher than
specific-
42.
Right.
What
But
she's
that's-
saying, let me give another example, like maybe Phoenicia,
Yes.
which is outdoor, it's on a corner, but it's more enclosed,
Right.
right? On the corner of Central and Kenwood? Or no?
I know what is that? Side street.
Lexington, yeah.
It'll
How
help
do you
us
define
visualize
it?
this.
How do you and who is able to make the determination
Well,
between those two? You know, do both of them enliven the pedestrian environment, or
that determination is based on the standards that we put in the draft ordinance. There may be an opaque wall, for instance, at the sidewalk, 42 inches high. Anything higher must be 75% open, transparent, and any roof nearby must provide a clearance of 2 feet between the top of such barrier and the edge of the roof.
So how does that enliven the pedestrian area? That's where I'm having a hard time.
Where is that?
On page
93.
Oh, yeah.
93, it's the paragraph before last.
I can see the 42-inch height. I can even see going to 48 for 4 feet, and you still have the eye contact and the draw-in. But when you get up and you're 2 feet above, so your height has to be 7'6" for something to walk under to be legal. So if you cut 2, you have 5'6". You don't have eye contact with those people anymore. Well, so that's why
maybe we're the area in taking your 5'6" example. The area between 42 inches and 5'6" has to be at least 75% transparent.
No, but actually it would be the area between whatever and 7'6", which is where a top would be. That's if you're going to walk under an arbor,
can't
you
be
have
anything
to design
there.
it to be 7'6".
Yeah, in between 5'6" and 7'6", there can't be anything. It has to be open air.
Right, but if you have it, you allow it all the way to 5'6" with the 2 feet here.
We don't allow solid up to 5'6". No.
Anything over 48 has to be
42.
transparent.
Well, actually,
75% of whatever's over.
The first 3.5 feet can be solid or can be open, or can be glass or wrought iron or whatever you want. The area between 42 inches and 5.5 feet must be
3.5.
at least must be glass or wrought iron or something which is not solid, which is at least 75% open.
So if they make it,
So for your Frida example, that
Glass,
That glass.
makes it still a visual connection.
correct.
Right.
but if they go
I believe Phoenicia
over,
too has glass.
if they go like 8 feet above the 42 inches, or 10 feet above the 42 inches, then 75% of that has to be transparent. So they can still have another 3 feet of non-transparent material that's over the 42 inches.
no, actually, anything higher than 42 inches must be 75% transparent.
Yeah, so but if it's 10 feet
right
above 42 inches, then
That whole 10 feet above the 42 inches,
75%
of that remains
transparent. So then the 30% that's not is above the 42 inches of non-transparent stuff, right?
and I've just lost you.
Okay,
No, I
so
think
42 inches, you have up to 42 inch of fence, right? That's not transparent. Let's say.
Anything over it.
And then you have another 10 feet
Or 5
above the
feet or 3
42
feet.
inches.
Right.
And 70 and 30 or 25% of the 10 feet is not transparent. So then you're adding like another 2 feet above the 42 inches that's not transparent, right? And you're blocking that.
So you're saying you
Well,
could
what
you
I'm
could
saying
do
is
that-
why
you
don't
could-
we make it 100%?
Well,
Well, take into consideration, I mean, for, let's say the Frida example, I'm assuming there's some sort of column or something that's holding up that glass. I mean, there's going to be some sort of support structure that holds up some of that
can we-
clearance. So that's part of
Can we say
taking
that?
into account the
Oh, okay.
the
So then
75%.
the columns are part of the calculation.
correct.
And the other thing that I would like to point out, if the proposal doesn't meet those criteria, then parking will be charged. This is to not charge parking based on these specifications.
Yeah. I guess I'm just concerned that they'll make something so high, or someone will make something so high that they'll make 70% of the rest of it all open, but it's all above the pedestrian level.
No, I mean, I think that's where the judgment comes in. If there has to be some sort of engagement at the pedestrian level.
I mean, Commissioner is saying,
Yeah.
I
With this
see where you're coming
criteria.
from theoretically, but theoretically they cannot build it like that.
This is
They need
its
columns.
scale. This is 42 inches.
And that was actually the consideration. The lower portion may be solid, it may be masonry or some
Yeah.
other solid, or may still be
planter.
open, or planted, flower pots, or it may be solid, all the way to solid.
That's nice.
But anything above those 42 inches, unless it is 75% open, which would take into account posts, supports,
Right.
and
Understood.
other solid materials, unless it's 75% open, anything above 42 inches, then parking will be charged, and it's not going to
Oh.
meet the criteria.
What I think he was worried about is that adding another, 2 for 6 inches of solid at the bottom, but that
bottom.
cannot be because
No,
of the
you can't.
structurally.
You're
It's not
literally
gonna be
stopped
that.
at the 42.
Yeah. So and then transparent means like glass is considered transparent.
Glass, wrought iron is transparent. Some other material we haven't seen yet that could be transparent.
Okay.
If there are posts, for instance, let's say masonry posts, 1 foot wide and spaced every so often, and openings in between, we're not going to measure just the openings. We're going to measure the entire length, and
Above the
75% of that entire length must be open, transparent.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if, like, even glass, if it's just all glass, if that's even enlivening the pedestrian experience or not.
Well, it
I'm
creates
just
a-
thinking in my head is that,
Well,
you know,
previous.
there's really a difference when you walk next to glass and when you walk next to just an open air, dining experience. I'm not exactly sure myself, but I'm just thinking about it that maybe it is enough. Maybe just having the glass is fine.
What we thought of, we put these standards together,
Yeah.
and the Planning Commission can modify these standards. The way they are written, they are easily modifiable. The 75% can be larger or smaller. The 42-inch, for instance, may be lowered or entirely eliminated.
What I might ask is that, you just mentioned, open, glass area as an open, but, if someone puts up the glass with the tinted glass.
Oh, it specifically calls out no
does-
tinted,
no
or
tinted,
I was
nothing,
having
okay.
the same thought.
Right, okay.
They cover
Well, how about a canopy? Like, if they put something over, what is do we have any?
you have to have 2 feet between.
There has to be a
you.
2-foot separation from the edge of that transparency and any kind of cover that may
Like Eve
go
Like even a awning.
an awning, correct. Or an umbrella. I mean, if you did all umbrellas.
Let me ask a little more about the 75%. If you were going to use that bric-a-brac trellis to put it between it, such as this, you did a little drawing. You can use it in you just have to give me credit.
Copyright.
What else I was curious about is, what if somebody chose something of that, a trellis-like material, and then you came back and found out they had grown a nice vine on it? I think we need to clearly state that vines cannot obscure that 75% in there, because I think we would want to encourage landscaping, but not have it then be used to obscure,
Encroach into that
encroach
75.
into that 75%. I want to make sure that we have that enlivened area, that eye contact.
We may want to consider adding kind of a performance standard that we can make a judgment that the final, product has to, in the opinion of the director, promote eye contact and, be visually transparent. So that, for instance, if someone put up a clear glass and then 6 inches inside put up a solid screen or something like that.
I think it has to be something that is reviewed or inspected or verified. Because as the discussion went on, the more I tend to think a lot like Commissioner Yassine brought up the point when you do glass, you've possibly lost that that experience, the sidewalk experience. From some people's view, if it was my business, I wouldn't agree with that. But also, that opens it up that, well, if it's this kind of glass, then it can be tinted, or it can be, put something in front of it. Or if you use a trellis, why is it 2 inches openings, or is it a half-inch opening? And so it just needs to be, I don't know what all the options would be, but some sort of a logical review process, like you mentioned, would be appropriate.
My concern also is that you could divide it into quarters, and if you divide it horizontally into quarters to get your 75%, and take that whole bottom quarter, you could add 2 feet to it, and it no longer enlivens the experience. So you would add it to that 42 inches, and if you were going up 8 feet, and you take 2 more feet there, you've really cut the eye contact out. So where you put that 75% needs to be visually, I think your performance standard has to be that visual eye interaction, or, in some form of engagement, social engagement needs to be a part of that performance standard.
May I ask Mr. Loomis if he has any thoughts on this, since he's one who's probably going to have to put it into place?
I think, that if we have some form of performance standard, that would certainly help. That would allow us to make a determination as to what the intent is. I understand the point about the 75% potentially being obscured by landscaping. Right. The example I can think of that's similar to that, which isn't on a public right-of-way or on a sidewalk, but is the new patio at Nota Luna in the Exchange, which has a very similar kind of appearance, and the sides probably will get grown over with landscaping, and is not the intent. So one language we could say, 75% clear, visually transparent, i.e. not made of tinted or opaque glass or obscured by landscaping, may get at that particular concern.
And maybe even, my concern is if I just divided this into quarters, if I actually made this top 3 quarters, I've actually cut out the eye here, contact. I've got 75% open. So that's why I think performance, the intent is to engage your sidewalk with your dining experience.
Right. And it may be that the criteria says that 42-inch line maybe needs to be fairly absolute, that at least some of that 25% does need to hit that 42-inch threshold.
Okay.
So you can't do that where there's panels above 42 inches, which is both the drawing you showed and Chair Sion was referring to, and then somehow 42 inches to 50 inches gets obscured with that 25% that can be obscured.
Which I think is the point.
The idea is we want to have eye contact with diners as you walk down the sidewalk.
And there is the first sentence of the narrative in the code language is the city's intent. The city's intent is to substantially enliven the pedestrian experience.
We could probably also include some language, depending on the direction of the commission, to limit the dimensions of supports above the 42 inches. Any supports may not have, for instance, a dimension of more than 6 inches or 12 inches, whatever they are. So that would limit pillars.
I would trust the structural folks to deal with it. I think that's a little
Don't want to limit the structural integrity of it.
I just want to add one comment, piggybacking on Commissioner Landrigan's thing about maybe light plants and things like that. I'm assuming etching on the glass is also part of the 25% calculation of the blockage, right?
Correct.
So that also to be included as part of the areas where the eye contact comes in, because they like to put their logos on there, whatever the designs on the glass itself. So the etching should that language should be in there, not to block those things as well, or part of the OPEC calculation.
Correct.
I think that makes sense.
Good point.
I mean, I think I'd be in more favor of we don't allow anything over 42 inches.
That's certainly another option.
Yeah.
Well, if you're in a windy corner of Americana, you might reconsider.
I see the benefit for the business of having it.
Yeah, I don't think you want to over-regulate that.
Well, I mean, we are giving an exception to the parking.
Yeah, that's true.
For them to do that, so it's
significant.
We have
dining
the
area.
ability to ask, for what you can build all these. You're getting extra seating room.
I like those things.
You like what?
Having those wind protections,
breaks.
and having those the outdoor furnace
Heaters, yeah.
Yeah,
All right. Beat that to death.
I think it's good. It gives a good ambiance.
Thank you.
All right. Well, what else?
I believe one item is left, and it's the sign programs.
What page is this on?
This is on page 102.
Right. Have that down here, too.
Okay, a little background on this. Sign programs are basically a unified set of standards that control signs on a particular commercial development on a multi-tenant site. They've been in effect since about 2000, and they get triggered by either new commercial development that proposes more than one tenant space, or when additional new tenant spaces are created in an existing center. Typically what happens is property owners are anxious to get their spaces leased and move on. So proposals for sign programs focus on variation on the fonts, variation on colors. And property owners anticipate future changes very poorly. So over time, as businesses change, or new tenant spaces have to be created, or tenant spaces divided into two, and new tenants have trademark requirements, limiting the choice of colors becomes a little problematic, or limiting fonts becomes a little problematic. And over time, adherence to the sign program becomes a little problematic. So we kicked this around and we thought of, in a nutshell, limiting sign programs to only certain types of signs that are permitted in the zoning code, like a wall sign, a ground sign, or a marquee sign, and not including and excluding sign programs from other signs, like a window sign, which are typically non-illuminated window signs don't even require a permit to put up. So limiting sign programs to a few sign types, and beyond that, limiting the criteria that sign programs are permitted to regulate to the location of the signs on the building or on the site, to the construction type, like a can sign or individual channel letters or reverse channel letters, and limiting sign programs to regulate the method of illumination only.
So why is this a good idea?
Because over time, I can show you some examples.
No, I'm serious. I think that, just reading it to us, I want to know why you think it's a good idea, because I want to know your intention and what you think it's going to do, because that's almost more important to me than rereading this.
Because it focuses sign programs on certain criteria, not an unlimited set of criteria. And it's the criteria that over time have proved to be more prominent on buildings, and that set the image on a building. And this is a proposal that we are bringing forth before the Planning Commission for some guidance.
I may be missing it. Where's the language about having some of these signs? I know the city of Glendale has big ethnic groups of Armenians, Koreans, Filipinos, and sometimes they put up signs in their own language where, is there somewhere in here that says you need to have, both languages, English and their native languages on there, and how do you regulate that?
That's not regulated. That's part of the free speech.
So if there's a sign up there that's purely in Korean, 100% Korean, how do you regulate that? How do you know what store that is? Or
The language is not regulated, nor is the content of the sign. What is proposed to be regulated?
because that is one of the
architectural.
issues that we are facing, not in Glendale, but instead of LA, in Koreatown, where the other community members like to visit Koreatown. They come in, they don't know where to go to, because some of these signs are not in English. So they are making it, the point that any sign that goes up there, if it's in a foreign language, then you need to have an English translation, next to it, or at least people know what store they're going into. So I think we need to have, similar type of a program here where sometimes I drive down in Glendale too, and then, some of those, the signs, I do not, understand what the stores are represented.
Your point, Commissioner Lee, is very well taken. That's beyond the scope of this because it's going to cover the entire sign ordinance. This is the focus of this is the sign programs, not all other signs.
So maybe there's something for you to then
Probably we can look into
consider.
it.
Yeah. Okay.
So on page 102, section B of the sign programs, why do we still say redevelopment agency? Do we want to change that too?
There's a provision that was adopted in the code that deals with this in the event that the redevelopment agency is dissolved.
Okay, so we're keeping that until it's dissolved, or I thought we don't call it redevelopment agency anymore.
There's language that refers to the successor agency or whatever agency replaces the redevelopment agency. In certain instances, it's the city council. We can certainly modify that.
The statement in there is that, unless I'm missing your point, it just alludes to the fact that sites that were originally reviewed by the agency, they would now be reviewed by. So it kind of distinguishes. It previously was reviewed by the agency, and those situations would now be reviewed by the director.
No.
The sign review board.
And then I'm missing. I'm reading the wrong one.
B?
Yeah, I was reading that in B, the last sentence.
Yeah, it's the last sentence.
If I might,
And
members
we-
of the Planning Commission,
Yes. Go ahead.
the last sentence in Section B is acceptable, but it's a sentence preceding that that's no longer accurate.
Oh, I see up there. I
The
missed it.
Glendale Redevelopment Agency, first
Yep.
of all, was dissolved on February 1st, 2012. The successor agency no longer has the
Yes.
authority pursuant to the Dissolution Act to undertake review of entitlements and planning activities. Also, the city specifically transferred the redevelopment agency and the city, prior to dissolution, transferred the authority to the city in the event of dissolution. So that sentence needs to be modified.
So it'd be
Or
the
removed?
director.
Or removed, yes.
And we've just discovered, sign programs in the sign chapter, and the authority granted there, as well as the authority granted in the design review chapter, which is 3047, which starts on page 121 of your ordinance. There seems to be two authorities given for sign programs, so we'll need to make those consistent for
Well, what's the authority?
the authority. The design review board will have the review authority. Our proposal for sign programs is the director of community development, but making sure that these are consistent.
So
or eliminate
how are you
the-
going to make it consistent by just doing director of community development?
Correct.
Okay.
That's our proposal.
Yeah. Okay. So this section B, design review board shall have the authority to review. You're going to change that to community development director. Is that going to be changed as well?
Correct, because there's two places here. So to make it consistent, we'll either
So the
eliminate one or
The
change them
director of
both.
community development shall have the authority to review and approve sign programs. And then this next sentence, the director of community development shall have the authority to review and approve sign programs for properties located in the DSP zone outside the redevelopment project area. Are we still keeping that? And
It
what does
would-
that mean?
That's currently what the review authority
Yeah.
is. If we change this to all the
Yeah.
community development director, we would just need to have one sentence that states that. We wouldn't need to make the distinction between DSP in the redevelopment area, not in the redevelopment area.
Can we, as stated now, the community development director does not have authority to review it in the redevelopment project area?
Actually, the Community Development Director has the authority now to review it within redevelopment project areas, as I previously stated.
Because the redevelopment project area has been dissolved?
No, the redevelopment project area itself has not been dissolved, but the redevelopment agency was dissolved and its review authority was eliminated.
Okay, so because their authority has been eliminated, then this has become void, basically. The sentence, I guess, needs to be revised as well, right?
Correct.
We'll revise that.
So then so I guess just the last part needs to be removed. The Director of Community Development shall have the authority to review and approve sign programs for properties located, I guess, properties citywide, right?
Correct, right.
So
So
just-
the cleanup of this is not just, changing one or two words. It would
Right.
combine sentences and have one statement that the review authority is the director of community development.
If I might suggest, perhaps the way that this should read is the first sentence of Section B would remain the same. The second sentence of Section B would read, "The Director of Community Development shall have the authority to review and approve sign programs," period. Because that would occur
Yeah.
both within and outside of existing project areas as it now stands. The next sentence would be deleted in its entirety. And then now moving to the last sentence, just the beginning of that would be deleted such that that states later subsequent would just read, "Sign programs for sites originally reviewed by the Glendale Redevelopment Agency shall be reviewed by the Director of Community Development."
Mm-hmm.
I believe that would be consistent with the authorities that we have right now, and I'm looking at Tim just to confirm.
You're proposing to keep or eliminate the first sentence of B?
Keep the first sentence of B,
But change it to the director of community
Yeah,
development.
change the
but change
design
that
review
to
board.
Director of Community Development. Modify the second sentence to end that sentence after sign programs, period. Delete the next sentence in its entirety. And then the last sentence would be to delete the first two words, later, comma, subsequent would be deleted. Work?
Yeah. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
So the sites, let me give a question. Sites reviewed by the Glendale Development Agency shall be reviewed by the Director of Community Development. So what about signs that have been approved previously by
It could be
the
originally.
redevelopment agency? Can the Director of Community Development go back and review those?
Perhaps it
Yes.
should be modified to say originally reviewed and/or approved.
But the last sentence says that.
Right, whether that says reviewed or approved.
Right.
Any existing sign programs that were reviewed by somebody else,
Right.
if there are modifications to those in the future with new rules, would be, instead of reviewed by the original authority, would be able to be reviewed by the Director of Community Development.
That's, I think you got it right. Remove the first two words and you're addressing the whole thing. So.
But to further clarify, to add, it would be originally reviewed and/or
And
approved. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
This would deal also with projects in the pipeline.
Or modifications.
Modifications. And that has been usually one of the issues. For instance, if a sign program has been approved in effect for a number of years, then tenant spaces are increased. There's a reluctance to apply for a modification because that modification must be reviewed by the design review board, including public noticing. It's a cumbersome process, and applicants shy away from that.
So
But this is to streamline that process.
what if Now, what if in the redevelopment agency we've approved projects that did not have, because previously it wasn't under the community development director's authority to have a sign program, but they have a sign? Is this retro? I mean, can the community development director go and say to those properties that you need to have a sign program now?
Well, if they were approved without a sign program, it means there was a single tenant. When there's a proposal for more than one tenant, then this requirement gets triggered, and the sign program will be reviewed by the director under this proposal.
I'm just thinking about one property on Maryland and Broadway. The sign above, which was, I think, under the redevelopment agency and was approved.
Well,
And so
if I understand you right, then your question is that we could go back to items that were already done, and I think not. I don't know if that's the way it's being understood, but if it's already been decided and approved.
Yeah, because under the different authority.
Yeah, what's in place is in place already.
Exactly.
If I may, there is at this point no provision to amend a sign program, just tweak it slightly. So a good example is the Marketplace or Fashion Square, which is across the street from the City Hall parking structure. Those large complexes have sign programs that are about 10 years old. If they want to deviate from that sign program or modify it in any of the slightest way, they have to amend the entire sign program. And they would come back at this stage to the original approving authority. So this would
You're not going to go across the street and tell them that something that they did back then is not acceptable now.
Right.
We're going to change.
They have an existing sign program in
so
place.
they're going back
that's-
to the existing authority, which is City Council.
Except that under the provisions that we're proposing, it would go to the Director of Community Development.
Director of Community Development, right. Okay.
But right now, the Marketplace wants
Yeah,
to
they would
amend their
go to-
sign program. They no longer have a movie theater. They no longer have Good Guys. Their sign program is designed to work around those tenants that don't even exist, not only in that center, but on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to add new signs that deal with the new tenants, they have to amend their sign program and bring it back to the City Council as the current authority on that site right now. So it's very cumbersome for those kinds of large properties that have very complex sign programs, particularly when they're designed around particular tenants, which is often the case. That they don't really think about long term, that tenants are going to change and this thing is going to live on and be a burden for re-tenanting a building.
Okay.
It's also cumbersome for the smaller developments, like 3 tenant spaces in a small development. They're required to have a sign program, and then over time tenants change, or tenant spaces are divided into additional or additional tenant spaces, and compliance with the sign program becomes an issue. And modification under current code has to go back to the design review board or the redevelopment or the former redevelopment council now.
So I just caught that redevelopment one, but I would suggest just searching for any other redevelopment stuff throughout the code and make sure that's resolved since we're doing these updates.
I had brought a few photographs to show you in case you want to see them, or we can move on. This is the last item, basically.
Let's go.
Let's move on.
You have the photographs here?
Yeah.
I recommend a change to this room is that you have a dimmer switch over there, that you could make it easier for us to see some of these.
I can hit that.
And we would like that to be voice activated, right?
Yes, I would.
Siri,
Is that an ordinance change?
dim the light.
Thank you.
We need an app for it. Okay, these are from relatively recent examples. This is on Chevy Chase and Adams. It's a little shopping center. When this was approved, signs had to use a turquoise color, but over time, we see a sign in red because it's a trademark.
Must be McDonald's.
And then the other thing that looks inconsistent, the ground signs that were approved had to have a certain minimum width of 24 inches with a glass block base. This sign doesn't fit those criteria. This is another one. The ground sign that was shown on the plans and approved had 3 horizontal tenant spaces advertised on it. The red portion, vertical portion, was supposed to advertise the center's name, and the sign had to have a stone base all the way to the ground. It's mounted now on a post. It has 2 tenants advertised here, and then a 3rd tenant in the vertical space that was supposed to be the center's name. So over time, things have changed.
And can you do that?
Well, permits were issued, and it's like that now.
And how long is the city's jurisdiction over that?
Ongoing. Until superseded by another sign program.
So, in essence, they're in violation of their sign program by doing that?
Well, we don't know if they actually have permits for it, but...
and it's
this is what's
ugly,
in-
quite frankly. You can put that on the record.
This is what's there now. And this is probably like a 5-tenant building. So this was approved in 2005.
By the time you did anything about it, there'd be new tenants.
Possibly. This is on Pacific and Stucker. This center had a provision to not allow green in the signs.
Really nice.
This sign is green. The Starbucks sign is green.
It's right by my house.
Is it?
I love the architecture. Very nice.
It's my coffee spot.
I love that place.
The approved detail is this, a raceway and channel letters on top. There is a sign here that doesn't fit the approved style. And then this is the little shopping center across from the college, Glendale College, City College.
Can you please?
Glendale College, actually, not City College. It's at 1500 Canada, approved in 2005. There were 2 ground signs approved in the proposal, one on the Canada side and one in this location on the Glendale side. The Glendale side was never implemented, was never built.
Verdugo, I'm sorry.
The Verdugo side, yes. And then in terms of shapes vary. Yellow was not an approved color, and we see yellow here.
So what do you do in that instance?
It's the trademark color, and we cannot say no. So we approve these administratively.
Oh, so they come to you and then...
So the proposal was for a certain number of colors. The design review board limited the number of colors and excluded yellow. But over time, when tenants started changing, we had to approve yellow.
So why do we have a sign ordinance if it's...
Sign program.
Sign program.
Yeah. That's why we are trying to
I
limit.
know why we have a sign
Exceptions.
ordinance.
We have an ordinance, but sign programs. That's why we are trying to limit the criteria to not color, but other criteria that can be more easily regulated under a program.
So that's what we see here is that colors being taken out.
Actually, color is not one of the criteria regulated by sign programs, but applications come in limiting colors.
And so sometimes whoever owns the property is not thinking in the future, oh, how are things going to change? I want everything to be green, not thinking that blue will be the new color. So, I mean, this is a way to focus on things that...
You can deal with.
Right.
Will this make it easier for you to enforce and less administrative exceptions or over-the-counter approvals?
Well, it may be easier in the sense that maybe property owners would still not be able to fully anticipate future changes, but at least in the proposal, the director has authority over it versus the design review board. And making changes would become easier. It would still require a formal submittal, but it would not have the hearing component in it and the posting requirements of the site.
If I may, in terms of the practical implementation of this, I think hopefully it will make the enforcement of sign programs easier. I can tell you that from a pragmatic standpoint, what happens with sign programs, particularly those that regulate fonts and colors, almost always the second application that comes in is in violation of that proposed sign program because it's for a tenant that uses yellow, like Subway, uses yellow in their font, and you're not going to convince Subway to change their corporate logo and their brand ID.
Ideally, the process is made for the development when it's initiated.
Right.
And all changes after that are variations. So my sense is that we're trying to streamline that so we don't have to go through the long process to let them go ahead and do something that's different from the original development plan.
Exactly. So in our current sign programs, we work very hard to sort of stay away from fonts, limiting the number of fonts or saying you're not allowed to have corporate logos and you're not allowed to have certain colors because every tenant has got their own brand ID that they want to put on their signs, and they will inevitably conflict with a sign program that tries to regulate fonts and colors. If I may finish, what we find is actually very effective is to regulate where signs are located. For example, on this structure, there's, the bottom right image has sort of two bay windows that sort of protrude out with an arched opening. It's very important that the sign be centered above that arch and centered in that panel above the arch, regardless of what that sign says or what colors it is. That architectural location is important, and that within that area the sign not exceed a certain box. So we've been with our current sign programs focused on those kinds of criteria. And then secondly, we think that the construction type of signs is probably more important to provide a consistent look across the building. That is to say, if there's going to be reverse channel letters, which is essentially what you see at almost all the storefronts at the Americana, they all have the same illumination style or one or two variations, the same construction type of the sign, and that gives a kind of consistency, even though the fonts and the colors, storefront to storefront, are very different. And so we think construction type, whether it's reverse channel or halo lit or however that's defined, that those may be...
Or
whatever it is, that's what we should be regulating. That's a lot easier to sort of evaluate over the counter when people come in for sign permits. Rather than saying, is it really this shade of yellow? Well, no, this is more green. That's the kind of conversations we end up having on some of these older sign programs where we're trying to regulate color. And almost every sign program ultimately ends up having a provision that says corporate logos are excluded. Well, everybody has a corporate logo now. Even if they're a mom and pop shop, they'll argue that it's their logo and it should be exempted. So it gets exempted from the sign program. So just taking that out of the equation makes the implementation of these easier. It still focuses on the kind of consistency that we think is important.
So you're going with a substantive argument as opposed to...
Yes. So that's kind of the direction we'd like to go in.
May I ask one more question? That ground sign that was altered, I think altering of something like that bothers me more than, the fact of those faces.
Oh.
Darn, it wasn't us. How would that be enforced? Is that now being exempted? I think that would still be in violation of the sign code. It had a structural integrity that is no longer there. It had actually an architectural integrity that is no longer there. So that's not going to be modified in any of these changes. Is it? That would still be in violation of the sign code and good taste.
That will still remain.
All right.
I would like to emphasize that our legal team has informed us that we're not allowed to bar anyone's copyrighted or trademarked logo, regardless of color. So, and regardless of the previously approved sign program. So,
I'm talking about the design of the ground sign.
Okay.
That would hold those logos.
Okay, I just said we're clear that
I'm not talking about any branding that people have paid money for. I'm talking about the architecturally approved sign. That sign there was not approved to be floating in the air. And so, in essence, if it's going to be a ground sign, it has to touch the ground, et cetera, and all of those elements. I think you have that here.
When we look at these sign programs, for instance, there is no deliberate language that says the sign shouldn't be floating and that the stone base is required. But you look at the graphics, that's what's proposed. The other example I have, for instance, is this one, top left. This is the center across from the college. There was a ground sign proposed on the left, in the area in the top photo, and another ground sign on the other street frontage. Well, the other sign was installed, but not this one. Can we say, for instance, the sign program is incomplete and there's non-compliance in this case because a second ground sign was not permitted, was not installed? So when proposals come in, they leave all these things unanswered, and the focus is typically on font and color.
I am totally in agreement with those changes. I think you validated the reasoning for them. The concern I have is if there's an architectural element that's approved and it's altered, that's a problem. That's not the sign. It's the sign architectural element. It's a stand. And to me, that's like changing your building. And I see that as something that should not be overlooked.
Your point is well taken, and I think you're correct that we're trying to focus on the architectural elements of signs, not on their fonts and colors. And that's something that, if fonts and colors are taken out of the equation, hopefully is something we would be focused on.
Along that same line, what's happening in my mind, I'm stuck on a point. I need clarification. My sense is that when the original sign plan is done with the developer, that's one thing. It's done a certain way, there are certain standards, everybody understands it, and they incorporate it in their process. Now, 5 years down the road, there are different tenants, there are changes that have occurred. When a new tenant wants to do a sign, does the sign program deal with the tenant, or does it deal with the development as a whole? Does it deal with the owner? Who's driving the process, and what does that do to what planning does relative to the sign program? Because I see it two different ways. Initially, you deal with the developer, you have a process, you go through it. Now the whole lay of the land is different. Who am I dealing with? Who's driving the process? And what does that create? Because in the latter description, I could see where it could open up for public forum, public input. It could, I don't know. To me, it seems to be a different process now after the development has been established.
Yeah. In my experience, you sort of have two things. From initially, when the development is being approved, the developer is usually the one submitting for a sign program because they have been told by planning you're going to need a sign program. So they'll go get somebody to prepare that. Sometimes that'll be done concurrent with their design review proposal, but oftentimes well after the building is under construction or finished. So initially it's the developer. Sometimes the developer is interested in having some standards on their building because it helps in their negotiation with tenants. Tenants will want to plaster the buildings with signs all over the place, and believe it or not, many developers and property owners don't want to see their buildings covered in signs. They sort of like the look of their buildings without all the signs. So they need some leverage and assistance from the city in terms of their negotiation with tenants. But once the sign program is established and tenants start moving in, especially as the building has life, oftentimes it's the tenant and their sign consultant who's coming in to get a sign permit. Many times hasn't been informed by the owner there's a sign program in place, and it's the planner at the counter that says, sorry, there's a sign program. Your signs can only be in red and you can't use yellow. And then there's a back and forth with a tenant's sign consultant, and really, in order to make a change to the sign program, they have to go back to the property owner who now has no interest in changing the sign program. So that's where
it does go back to the owner.
Yeah, and that's where, because the sign program has to be amended or changed in whole, then it makes it very difficult to sort of allow buildings to adapt over time. So again, that's why with our new sign programs, we've been very focused on where do you locate signs, and then otherwise, and what construction technology do they have. And beyond that, just sort of step away and say it's permitted by the code. We have many older buildings, especially where the sign program a sign in a particular location is limited to a tenant over a certain square footage, and the building doesn't have any tenants of that square footage anymore because the big square footage has been subdivided into smaller pieces. The sign program can't adapt.
Thank you.
Anything else? I have one more thing. On page 124, talking about standards, and the second paragraph says, for the purposes of this section, the term review authority shall mean Design Review Board, Glendale Redevelopment Agency, City Council, Director of Community Development, or the Historic Preservation Commission as applicable. So does this mean whatever, anything below this description where it applies to each of those, they are considered the review authority?
Correct. For purposes of design review.
Okay, sounds good. All right.
Mr. Chair, I have a couple of questions
Sure.
on other sections that were not called out specifically. On page 35, where at number C, at the bottom of assignment or conveyance of private open space, assignment or conveyance of off-street parking spaces, one off-street parking space in the DSP zone, that was added. And two required off-street parking spaces in all other zones shall be conveyed with each unit as an exclusive easement. What is the reasoning for that?
The background is that recently, probably three years ago or so, the parking requirements in the DSP zone were modified.
And we had that parking study, and
Right.
So this is part of the parking study's recommendations?
This is a continuation. At that time, the parking chapter in the zoning code was modified to modify the parking requirements based on that study, and parking requirements in the DSP zone were lowered for certain land uses, including residential uses. Now, this is happening in the subdivision code now. In the subdivision code, that same reduction didn't take place. So this amendment now would bring this in consistence with the parking code that was amended for the DSP zones.
So it could apply to condos,
It
the
can
ownership
apply.
of the unit.
Condos, when the condos are being developed, and there's another provision in here for condo conversions. It's similar.
Okay. On page 96, and that actually, 96, 104, and 128 kind of all go together. You have at least 75, let's talk about tree species down here. At least 75% of the tree use shall be trees with a spread at maturity of at least 25 feet, et cetera. Now, one of the concerns I had, if we go to 104, page 104, where you say on O, a planting strip a minimum of 5 feet wide shall be established and continuously maintained and landscaped. So you have a problem with your canopy cover and the maintenance of that within that area. And I'm only saying this because it does bother me that we require that we have a tree that has, a 12.5-foot spread from its trunk on either side, and you have 5 feet here, and it's going to infringe in one way or the other. And so that's a concern I have in that area. And then if you look at 128, you have maintenance of approved building colors, building materials, and landscaping, in that you don't say that the canopy, once reached maturity, shall not be reduced to anything less. So in other words, you can you can prune a tree so that it never reaches its mature canopy coverage. And my question in all three of these is the intent, and it's my assumption, but you can disabuse me of that the canopy is there to reduce the heat island effect, to provide shade, which reduces the evaporation of petroleum from cars when they're in the shade, and also it has to do with groundwater recharge. And some of these things don't work together to do that. So I'm just bringing that inconsistency up to you, ask you to sort of address it. I would assume, I think would be a good idea to ask that the canopy be allowed to reach maturity and cannot be trimmed back so that it is polarded or butchered, in other words. And number two, that in areas where you have a smaller confined space, such as in the landscaped areas that are 5 feet wide, that a smaller canopy tree be recommended in that space. I still think we want to have the cover. I understand the intent, but I think that you have to make sure that the situation you're asking for is realistic it's a live plant. It's not, something structurally that you can put up there. Those are the questions I have on that one. Did you want to say?
Yeah. Let me answer your second point first. On page 104, that planting strip is against property lines or against the street. And page 96, the requirement for the shade trees is under letter B, which is interior parking lot landscaping, which excludes those required strips at the edge of a property.
But in
so
some
really,
of our code, we require screening.
The 75, the requirement for shade trees on page 96 does not apply to the trees required on page 104.
Okay.
Okay, and so
but if they're abutting a street, except a driveway, I mean, they may have a wall, they may not. They may cover. In some instances, they can be put there because you'll have a
someone
sidewalk
chooses to, yeah,
and the driveway on either side of that planting strip, or a driveway. Let's look at it. I think that's a good point that you're saying that's not where it should be.
No, if the trees in a planter which is along a property line or along the street is part of a design review package, then we would have the ability to say, hey, that tree's not appropriate for that area.
Okay, because right above it is L. It has the interior planting requirement. I mean, there's lots of sections that kind of are, interlinked.
Yeah, the one on page 96 was definitely for the interior of parking lots. Okay. So, because people always want to park in the shady spots. You go into any parking lot, the shady spots are taken first. Regarding
128.
Yeah, regarding the growth, not trimming. When we first put these requirements into the zoning code, we were kind of stymied as to finding a practical way of judging trimming, something that was really enforceable for our code enforcement guys to do. And at least at the time, and at least with the city arborists that we were working with, we didn't come up with any language that we felt was sufficiently simple and clear for property owners and our code enforcement guys to understand. So, we'd be happy to take another look at it, but that we did consider that and purposely kind of stepped back from it.
Well, it's a performance standard of a living thing. It's difficult to codify, but
if you could point us towards some suggested language, we'd be happy to look at it against what the concerns were at that time.
All right. right. Then I have, those are good answers for me. Thank you. Page 96. Let me see, did we cover 96 yet?
Yes.
Now I've thrown all my things together. 9, 4, 5, 6. Back this way. You have 96.
It's right here.
Oh, yeah, I brought that
brought
up.
that up.
Same thing. All right, so we have 96, 104, and 128. I have 102, if I can find it, since I've now put everything in a whole other order. Oh, and 102, let me ask you this about the sign. I got that. I got 102. 110. On 110, the question I have on 110 is that we added mailing labels for all occupants of properties numerous times throughout this in every noticing area. Was the change are included in the public notice mailing labels and a property occupant map keyed to the occupant mailing labels? What was changed in that? Was that not everywhere? Is that what you're telling me? And so this has now been taken verbatim and put in here, or is there a change into the public, into the noticing and mailing wording?
No, when we changed that, we did not put it in this section, so it's being added to this section now.
Okay, all right. And let me ask you this question then. So now when we have a rehearing, we require that it be renoticed. Does that mean that we will be requiring that they renotice through mailing? I hope not. I'm just telling you my thought. Is that what we're requiring, though? Is that
If it's continued to a certain date certain, then no, without further notice, it wouldn't be a mailing. But if there's a rehearing, yes, everything gets remailed to owners and occupants.
So we've changed it so that if it is renoticed, it now has to be re-signed and the mailing has to be sent out again. Is that correct? To the same radius?
A
huge cost.
I believe there's an exception for things which are returned for redesign. I believe in that case that only people who had expressed an interest and asked to be notified.
Well, I would like it to be
renoticed.
clear because that's a huge economic burden on the applicant. And it costs quite a bit to mail to a 500-foot radius. And I would not want to burden an applicant that way if that's the case. I would be opposed to that, and I would recommend that you all look at that and make sure that.
So what's your proposal for that?
Well, I don't know if it states that. I know that it says that if comes back, it has to be renoticed. And what I wanted to make sure is
Renotice for what purpose?
if a planning commission, if it comes back, am I correct? They were not having to renotice it if it was. What does the new renoticing requirement require?
I don't know that there's a new renoticing. I think the only thing that the change that recently happened is that we added occupants to our mailing
It's
radius.
opposed to
within the-
owners and occupants.
Correct. And so we've made that consistent throughout all of our already established noticing requirements.
All right. So if it's been if it's so there's no change to reposting.
There's no changes to it. It's just we're making consistent.
Whenever they do notice, it's
when there is
occupants.
notice that it does include occupants.
Okay.
When
All right.
sites are posted,
That was
they-
the question I
okay.
had there. All right. Thanks. 115. Let's see. So on this, we have an extension of one additional year here, but in a couple of other places, we don't have a time restraint for an extension. Do we want to make that consistent? 1 year extension? Do we want to just check? I mean,
Why do we want to do time?
and why is it 1 year? Why is it not like a re-up of 2 years, which it was originally for? Is that negotiable or not? I mean, those are questions I have when we have an extension.
Well, the section here on page 115.
Yes, says 1 year.
Right. The 1 year is in addition to the original.
Correct.
2 years. And that was already in the code in terms of the 1 year extension request. The only thing we did here is grant the authority to the director of community development as opposed to the...
Then why is the whole thing underlined? Wouldn't the only thing be underlined what is changed?
Yes, let me explain why it was underlined. Because we took out that paragraph from the prior section and made it into its own section. So it seems in the ordinance that the entire paragraph is being added.
Yeah, but it's not. It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
You put it under a new section.
Just added this.
Yeah.
But there is another area where we have given the authority of an extension to the community development director, the director of community development, and there is no time extension on it, and I don't have it marked. And we don't need to go
It's on
back.
page 116, I believe, at the top.
Yes, think you're right.
That's not an extension. That's basically a reactivation of a design review entitlement for the purpose of reactivating a building permit.
And it has no time specific constraint on it?
It will go with that building permit application.
Ah, so that's what it's tied to.
Yes.
Okay. And
I saw redevelopment agency here again, and shouldn't we just eliminate redevelopment agency everywhere? It's city council now. It's dissolved, right? Wherever we do put redevelopment agency, it still says, or if redevelopment agency is suspended or eliminated, then city council. Don't we just want to get rid of that? I mean, because it's going to come back again, I guess, later for a change.
Members of the commission, Chairman Usain, it really doesn't affect
Yeah.
The application of the code. It certainly can be left in or it can be taken out.
Right.
Whatever your recommendation would be.
It's kind of a moot point.
Either way.
Yeah, because it's giving the...
all right, your prayers are answered. I only have one more question.
But
So you all can eat. It's from exemptions, which starts on 118, but the question I have is on 119, and that's number B, all new B under the ROS, R1R, and R1 zones, where it has all new buildings or alterations to existing building which propose an increase in floor and or garage area and do not propose an additional story facing a street which includes an increase in floor area. We only changed the word floor
Right.
because that was being misunderstood.
Yes, and the practice was for floor area, not area. Area
Okay.
can mean something unenclosed. Floor area means it's enclosed.
Okay. All right. That was my last question. Thank you.
Mr. Changley?
I got a couple of questions. It's more clarification purposes. I have a few businesses who wanted to come into Glendale, but wasn't sure about the definitions of their business, how it fits into the city of Glendale atmosphere. And one is the indoor sauna. Now, under our gym and health clubs, there is indoor sauna that's being mentioned. Now, is that incidental to the gymnasium and all the health fitness equipment that's there that is allowed indoor sauna, or can indoor sauna establishment be established for that sole purpose, for having the indoor sauna? The reason I'm asking is that it is one of the growing areas or business that is becoming very popular in Koreatown, and I have to drive all the way out there to go to sauna. Okay. And the second item is there is actually business interest to establish indoor sauna in Glendale. There's another business entity who wants to open up a karaoke establishment here. Now, I did not find any definition under retail businesses or anywhere else. What type of regulations are there? Entertainment permits or whatever that regulates karaoke establishment. Can they just come in and open up a karaoke establishment? Now, that too, I have to drive 30 minutes down to LA to.
I mean, for the karaoke, I mean, depending on if it's just standalone karaoke, but I'm not sure if it's associated with a restaurant or anything else like that.
No,
but we have
the karaoke. I think what you're familiar with is open area karaoke, where you have the, open bar area, and then you can just walk up to the stage. Now, there are private room karaokes, which Glendale does not have, where is very popular in Los Angeles area. That's the establishment that wants to come into Glendale to see if that type of a room karaoke establishment could be established.
I mean, our definitions to cover all types of land uses try to be broad enough to try and find something where places like this could fit in. What first comes to mind is like an indoor recreation center, like the bowling alleys of the world, the roller rinks of the world, things of that nature that this may be something similar to. This is just off the top of my head. But.
So I guess I did not have an answer for this, the business interest, because there was no definition. He was afraid to come in fear of actually not being able to get building permits or go through the initial stages of getting the permits that's necessary to open up this type of establishment. There, obviously in Los Angeles, requires for room karaoke to have entertainment permits, police permits, and all the other stuff that comes with it. There is no guidance in here in Glendale, so he was afraid. It was a new charter area, so he did not want to come in. But I like to encourage those people to come in. It is a wonderful entertainment.
The Maryland Art and Entertainment District might be a very good place for him to consider, because many of the permit processes for business licenses and et cetera that you mentioned are tailored along Maryland Avenue in the downtown to accommodate those kinds of innovative.
So what you're saying is that if I encourage business entities to come in that area, the art district area, the city of Glendale has no problem with accommodating them.
I wouldn't say we have no problem without sort of looking in more detail, but the process of the Art and Entertainment District was intended to be accommodating to those kinds of businesses, and certainly that's the area where the policies and the codes are open to those kinds
I'll say not hundreds, but quite a bit of this type of establishment in LA. So, for us to encourage those businesses to come into Glendale, and it is a good business. I think we need to have some sort of a guideline, for them, so that they're not, right now they're afraid to come in because, it is a black box to them. But if there's a little bit better guidance from the city as to how we can handle those things and how we can guide those people, for those businesses, so I'm just making a suggestion.
Well, if they don't come in, we can't guide them. So we welcome them to come in. We'd be happy to
what
direct them in the right.
City of Glendale says no?
So encourage them to talk to one of them, and then Maryland District has been established just to encourage those kinds of uses. So I think that's really good. And if you have businesses, just tell them to talk to them.
The reason that I'm raising this question is that this business were ready to come in, but initial it takes $1.5 million, $2 million for these people to open up this type of business. So it's not just, a few tens of thousands of dollars investment or hundreds of thousands of dollars investment. They have to make a big commitment. And in order for these people to have any type of a business planning, you need to have some sort of a guideline, and that's already being done in the city of Los Angeles. So you may want to take a look at that and see if you can have that type of guidance, so that we can guide them through, to invite those business into Glendale. It's just a suggestion. And same thing with the indoor sauna.
Okay, anything else related to this ordinance? All right, can we get a motion to recommend?
Sorry, we have something to add.
Yes.
This is something that the city attorney just brought to my attention. On page 140, under appeal filing and submittal of information, these. There is a good clarification. I don't want to change that. I want to add another one on a slight tangentially to say if the 15th day falls on a weekend or a holiday or when the city is closed, the appeal may be filed on the next business day. Sure. If the 15th day falls on a weekend or a holiday or when the city is closed, the appeal may be filed on the next business day. Yes.
Yeah. Anything else? No? Okay. Can we get a motion
I don't know if this requires a motion or
to recommend? Do we need a... Yes.
just recommendation, I think.
Need a second, too?
That the planning commission recommends that the city council adopt ordinance Glendale Municipal Code Code Amendment incorporating suggestions as appropriate.
What'd you say?
I move that the Planning Commission recommends that the City Council adopt the proposed ordinance to amend the Glendale Municipal Code related to zoning code amendment case number PZTA 1306680, incorporating suggestions and recommendations as appropriate.
A second.
Great. Can we have a roll call?
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, next item, Planning Department updates.
Yes, I have two items. One is your next meeting on May 15th will have the two continued appeals plus a third that you'll be hearing. I would like to remind commissioners that although the code provides that your term as a commissioner runs with the term of the person who appointed you, you also serve until any replacement is named. And then some really good news is that, Kristen, why don't you announce this? Kristen is on the board of the California State Chapter of the American Planning Association.
I am pleased to announce that Glendale is the recipient of two awards of excellence. One related to the Glendale Greener Glendale Plan.
Fabulous.
And the second for the Dorn Gardens affordable housing project and park.
Community garden?
Yeah.
The Dorn Gardens, the park.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Community
So-
park, yeah.
Wow.
So
Really cool.
2 awards of excellence were given, and there'll be an award ceremony in June to honor Glendale as well as some of the other recipients in the LA area
Fantastic.
Congratulations.
From APA?
from the Los Angeles section of APA.
Oh, great.
All right.
All right, next item, Planning Department updates.
Great.
Congratulations.
Make sure you get a press release out on that. Excellent.
Congratulations. Anything else?
I have a question.
Comments from commissioners?
The reason that these two cases were continued is that you wanted to have a full commission, or?
There's two reasons. One was they wanted to have the full commission, and the second one, case, they wanted to have more time to finish up their traffic study.
The reason I'm asking this is that on the, I think, 15th, is it?
You're not going to be here.
I'll be in Korea again, so.
Okay.
I want to ask if that's a valid reason for a continuation. That seems to me to be playing, who's going to be there, who's not. It seems to me not a very substantive reason, and I would like our legal opinion on that.
Sure. Members of the commission, it is within the discretion of the commission whether to continue it. You're going to look at whether or not the request is based on something that's reasonable. Certainly completion of a study necessary to present information to the commission appears to be the sort of facts that the commission would probably find reasonable. It is not necessarily unreasonable to request that the full hearing board be available for that purpose. Certainly the council has continued matters on its own motion in order to have the other members available to hear certain matters that are up on appeal.
So who requested the South Central Avenue to be continued?
Or the
applicant did?
The appellant.
The applicant is the appellant.
Because I thought we were ready to make a decision on this. But anyways, I just wanted to make the comment that I will not be here.
You will not be here on May 15th.
So that reason, if they
I
ask
think
for
this was deadlocked
continuation,
before.
we can discuss it at that time.
Yes, you can discuss it at that time.
All right.
And hear their reasons for.
Well, we could also decide to continue it on May 15 as well.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Because I believe this was deadlocked before, right? This case.
Yes.
Yes.
But we also required Mr. Sheets to watch the whole thing so that he could deliberate. It might still have been deadlocked, but one knows not. May I
go
make
ahead.
a comment? Well, as we all know, our terms go with our elected official. However, our parking passes expired in April. So we...
You actually use that?
I do.
I've never
I'm
used
just
it.
curious if we should just assume we're not going to be... Yes, I know, but it says mine expired April 2013, so today I'm illegally parked.
Where do you... I just parked visitor.
Shana's mine also.
So,
Everybody.
if we park in the commissioners' parking spaces, our parking passes expired yesterday. That's just a piece of...
Well, let's hope your cars are still
Trivia.
there when we go out.
We're trying to encourage our commissioners to bike to the meeting.
Oh, yes, it is. It's Bike to Work Month.
Yes.
You didn't say anything yet.
Well, I haven't made my announcements yet.
I've been parking there. It's expired 2 years ago, and then it's still parked there. I did not get a ticket. So, just out of curiosity, who's being termed out with the council member? Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I believe it's Mr. Storin was Mr. Manukian's appointment.
I see. Okay.
Or nomination, I should say.
I see.
Mr. Sheets and Mr. Astorian are the two.
I was Frank Quintero, so.
Yeah, but he's being extended.
Well,
for another year.
I don't know how that's all going to work because it's a different position, so we need to hear the details on that.
Now, are we, since it went with it, do our appointing council members need to reappoint us?
Yes, they do. My understanding is that that will be agendized soon, although perhaps not in May, perhaps in June.
Mm-hmm.
But
So we'll see. We may all be here.
good Lord willing, and the creeks don't
I'll
rise.
be gone.
Well,
Or some of us will be here.
two of us are for certain to be here.
We'll
Would
see.
I not be here?
Well, she has to reappoint you.
Oh, you have
No,
all
we have to be
right.
we have to be reappointed as well.
No, our term
I have
had-
to be reappointed as well.
No, two of us.
Only you. Only you are
Yeah,
safe.
only you're safe.
Why?
here.
Oh, because
Everyone
okay, that's right.
else has been changed.
So you may be the only one here. Okay?
We don't know.
You'll welcome the rest of the commission.
All right, he just got reelected.
Oh, okay.
So we'll see. We can talk more about it.
Now, lastly, are you going to give us some good news? Are you going to do an announcement?
Yes.
All right.
Go ahead.
I just have one quick announcement. The Parks and Open Space Foundation run, the Verdugo Hills 10K Run and Walk, will be this Sunday, the 5th. I've driven the course with one of the directors and tell you that I would have trouble walking it, for sure couldn't run it. But having said that, it's a beautiful venue. If anybody has not gone to this run, if you know what Brand Park is like, and they set up the venue around the tea house in that area, and I find that it's a very pleasing atmosphere. Families show up, they bring picnic lunches, put the blanket down. It's just an amazing venue. And on that same note, in driving the course and viewing the course, it would amaze you to see on a Sunday morning how many people go to Brand Park just to walk and bike. The parking lot a Sunday morning at 8 o'clock was jammed. And granted, there were a few soccer players that were there, but most people were getting out of the cars and going into the mountains or coming up in their bikes or whatever they were doing, and they were going up in the mountains. So it's a great venue. We talk about parks and open space in the city. It's a large venue. It has so much to be enjoyed and appreciated. So if nothing else on Sunday morning, if you want to come out and see these runners go out and partake in the event and enjoy their receiving their awards afterwards, it's a great event and a lot of people go there. So I just wanted to bring that up.
I love that event. I am actually registered.
Yeah.
I'm registered, but I cannot attend. But I am registered, and I paid the fee. I would love to.
The foundation appreciates that.
Yeah, but I did attend last year, and it was really great.
It's a great event.
And so this is Bike Month, and we have Bike to Work Day is, I don't know the day, but it's in the next week or so. And we have Walk by Glendale has stuff planned for Bike Week. And then most importantly is on May 19th, Sunday, we're having a big bike ride co-hosted with the Glendale Rotary Club and Walk by Glendale. And it's to raise money for low-income and homeless in Glendale, for Essentia, the Salvation Army, and Glendale Healthy Kids. And it's on May 19th, Sunday. There will be 2 rides happening. One is the Gear Grinder, which is 35 miles, lots of hills, and it's a $35 registration fee. If you're looking for a challenge, it's a really good ride, and it's going to go all the way up to Dukmajian Park. And the other ride is a more family-friendly ride. It starts at 9:30 a.m. Gear Grinder starts at 7:30. The family-friendly ride starts at 9:30 a.m. and 7 miles long, mostly flat, all flat. So if you have family or if you want to take an easy ride, that's a great ride to do, and it's $15. Very affordable, and it'll be a really fun day. If you have kids between 4 and 12, we'll also have bicycle safety classes. So bring them there, and it's free, and they can take a class between 8 to 12. It's at Verdugo Park on May 19th, Sunday.
I think based on with using today's technology, we might have a date for you.
Well, this members of the commission, the League of American Bicyclists Bike Month in 2013, Bike to Work Week is May 13th through 17th.
Yeah.
And Bike to Work Day is Friday, May 17th.
Great.
According to that website.
Yeah. So bike to work that day, please. We will have a bunch of pit stops. So if you want to find out where the pit stops are at, walkbyglendale.org. And then we'll have a happy hour afterwards. So you guys are all invited.
And if you can't bike, you can bike and bus. So if it's too
Yes.
far, you can come.
That's what I
everything.
always do. Or I just bus it too.
I promise I'll buy.
All right.
Great.
I move for adjournment.
Perfect.
Second.
All right.
you.
Adjourn. Thanks, everyone.